I was 28 years old when I realized my father no longer saw me as his daughter. My mother had died of breast cancer when I was 19, and in the years that followed it was always just Dad and me against the world. He was my rock, my anchor, the one who coached my soccer teams when I was a kid, the one who taught me to change my oil, the one who held me when I broke down after Mom's funeral. For almost a decade we were each other's only family. I never imagined a day would come when he'd choose someone else over me, but that day arrived. It began quietly without drama about 14 months ago, when Dad met Vanessa at a charity golf tournament. He was 53, she was 41, and I told myself it was good to see him happy again. Just 3 months later, they were engaged, and by 6 months they were married. I wasn't thrilled at how fast it all happened, but I swallowed my hesitation because I thought Dad deserved a second chance at love. I should have listened to my instincts. From the very beginning, Vanessa made it clear I was an unwelcome shadow in her new marriage. Her comments were subtle, never overtly hostile, but always sharp enough to leave a sting. "Oh, you're still coming over for Sunday dinner? Don't you have friends your age? Or your dad mentions you so much it's like I'm competing with a ghost." And the one that cut deepest: "Don't you think it's time you started calling me Mom?" We're family now. I tried to brush it off. I told myself what mattered was Dad's happiness. If she made him smile, then I could endure the little digs. But over time, those digs widened into cracks and the cracks became canyons. Dad and I used to text almost every day, small things, jokes, reminders, updates. Suddenly he was too busy. Our weekly dinners became monthly, then stopped altogether. The final blow came on my birthday. For as long as I could remember, birthdays were our thing. Even after Mom died, Dad always made sure we spent the day together. But this year, all I got was a text at 9 p.m. "Happy birthday, kiddo. V and I are at the spa resort for the weekend. We'll catch up soon." I stared at the screen, numb. I told myself it was fine, that maybe he'd make it up later. But deep down, I knew something precious had broken. A week later I drove to his house determined to talk. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Vanessa did most of the talking, while Dad sat there beside her, nodding like a puppet. "We're newlyweds," she began sweetly. "We need our space to build our life together. Your father and I are establishing new traditions now." I tried to keep calm, tried to reason. But then she leaned forward and delivered the words that shattered me. "We need to start fresh without the past. Your constant presence is a reminder of Richard's previous life, Richard." She called my father by his first name as if I wasn't sitting right there. I looked at Dad, waiting for him to defend me, to fight for me, to tell her I was his child, and nothing would ever change that. Instead, he mumbled, eyes fixed on his hands. "Vanessa thinks it would be best if we take some space for a while." "Space?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Vanessa smiled. "We're thinking of renovating your old room into a home gym. Could you come get your things by next weekend?" My throat burned. I asked about the family photo albums, about Mom's jewelry, the heirlooms Dad had promised would one day be mine. Vanessa waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we've been decluttering. I donated a bunch of old books and papers. And those outdated jewelry pieces didn't really fit our aesthetic, so we're having them redesigned into something more modern." Her words were knives. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned to Dad one last time, begging silently for him to stop this madness, to stand up for me, for Mom, for us. But he wouldn't even meet my eyes. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stood, forcing a smile that tasted like ash. "I understand," I said softly. "You want a fresh start without me in the picture. Consider it done." Dad opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to soften the blow, but Vanessa cut him off with a satisfied nod. "I think Emma understands perfectly. This is for the best." The next day when they were out, I returned with my key. I packed what was left of my things, walked quietly through the house I had once called home, and left the key on the counter with a short note: "For your fresh start. Good luck with your new life." That was the last time I saw my father for weeks. 9 years of being his only family. 9 years of grieving together, laughing together, surviving together. Erased in a single conversation because his new wife wanted to start fresh. The house that once held my mother's warmth now belonged to strangers. The father who once swore he would never leave me had chosen silence over love, and I was no one's daughter anymore. The first few weeks after leaving that house felt like wandering through a fog I couldn't escape. I went through the motions of work, answered friends' texts with hollow words, and lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, asking myself how a daughter becomes disposable. Grief is strange. It doesn't just come from death. It comes from absence too, from the living choosing to act as though you don't exist. Sometimes I would scroll through old messages from Dad, the ones where he called me his kiddo, the ones where he sent me jokes and silly memes. It was like reading letters from a ghost. I couldn't reconcile that the man who had once been my protector, my safe place, was now a stranger siding with a woman who saw me as baggage. And then came the whispers. A cousin called one evening, her voice hesitant. "Emma, I don't know how to tell you this, but Vanessa's been showing off on Facebook. New car, diamond necklace, luxury vacations. She keeps tagging your dad, saying starting our life with no strings attached." No strings attached? I almost laughed at the cruelty of it. That phrase meant me. I was the string, the unwanted reminder of a life she hadn't lived, a woman she hadn't known. My mother's ghost. And instead of honoring that ghost, my father had allowed her to erase it. I told myself I wouldn't look, but of course I did. Late at night with the lights off, I opened Vanessa's profile. Every photo was a performance, her hand clutching Dad's arm, manicured nails glinting with a new ring, captions about building our empire. My father's face was there too, smiling, but I could see something in his eyes, a dimness, a hollow I had never seen before. For weeks I said nothing. I told myself silence was dignity, but inside rage coiled tighter with each passing day. Not just at Vanessa but at him, for letting it happen, for sitting quietly while she gutted our family, our history, our love. The breaking point came when I received an email from Vanessa herself. No greeting, no warmth, just cold words. "Emma, we've decided to renovate further. There are still boxes of your mother's things in the attic. Please collect them by Friday, otherwise they will be discarded." Discarded. My mother's belongings, the woman whose absence had defined my entire adult life, reduced to clutter in Vanessa's fresh start. I drove over that Friday, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't bear the thought of Mom's legacy being trashed. Dad wasn't home. Vanessa greeted me at the door with a smile too sweet to be real. "Oh, good you came. The attic's up there. Try not to make a mess, we've just had the carpets cleaned." I wanted to scream, but instead I bit my tongue until it nearly bled. I climbed into the attic and found the boxes shoved into a corner covered in dust. My hands shook as I opened them. There were Mom's journals, her recipe cards, the locket she used to wear every day, photographs of us when I was little, memories preserved in ink and fabric and silver. I packed them into my car like they were sacred relics, because to me they were. As I carried the last box down the stairs, I caught sight of Vanessa in the living room sipping wine from a crystal glass. She didn't even look up. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I realized this wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about survival. If I didn't fight to preserve my mother's memory, no one would. If I didn't carve out a place for myself in this family story, I would vanish from it completely. The final blow came a week later. Dad called me for the first time since I'd left. His voice was awkward, halting. "Emma, Vanessa thinks it might be best if we limit contact for a while, just until things settle. She feels it's hard to bond with you around." I nearly dropped the phone. Limit contact. He had already erased me from birthdays, from dinners, from his home. What was left to limit? My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. "Dad, she's not just cutting me out, she's cutting Mom out too. She's destroying her things, rewriting our history. And you're letting her." There was silence on the line. A long, heavy silence. Then he sighed. "Emma, you're an adult now. You have your own life. Vanessa and I need to build ours. It's time to move forward. Move forward without me." When the call ended, I sat in the dark holding Mom's locket in my hand, and I swore to myself that I wouldn't let Vanessa erase me or my mother. If my father was too blind to see what was happening, then I would open his eyes. Maybe not with words, maybe not with pleas, but with the truth. Because family secrets don't stay buried forever. And the more they tried to silence me, the more determined I became to dig. Once I made that vow to myself, I couldn't go back. Every word Vanessa had spoken, every smirk, every dismissal, replayed in my head like a taunt. She wanted to erase me, to bleach away my mother's presence, to mold my father into her perfect puppet. But she didn't know me. She didn't know the lengths I would go to protect the woman who raised me, the woman whose memory was the only anchor I had left. At first I didn't know where to begin, but fate has a way of revealing cracks if you look closely enough. One evening, while sorting through my mother's journals, I found a line she had written years ago. "Richard has always been too trusting. He gives everything away without asking what he gets in return." I stared at the sentence and something inside me shifted. My father had always been generous, sometimes recklessly so. If Vanessa had seen that weakness, she would exploit it. I started small. A quiet search of public records, late nights hunched over my laptop following digital breadcrumbs. It didn't take long before Vanessa's carefully polished image began to fray. There were bankruptcy filings under her maiden name, a foreclosure on a condo just 6 years ago, and then the detail that chilled me: a previous marriage brief, an ugly ending, and restraining orders and whispered accusations. She had buried it all beneath her fresh start narrative. I remember sitting back in my chair, my heart pounding. My father had no idea. He thought she was a glamorous second chance at love, when in reality she was a storm he had willingly walked into. But I couldn't just barge in waving papers. Dad would never believe me outright. Vanessa had poisoned him too thoroughly. I needed proof so undeniable, so raw that even he couldn't turn away. So I waited. I visited when I could, forcing a smile while Vanessa scrutinized me like a trespasser. I kept my eyes open, listening, watching. It was during one of those visits that I noticed the credit card statements piled on the kitchen counter. My father had never been careless with bills before, but now they were everywhere, thick envelopes marked urgent, unopened. Vanessa swept them aside whenever I came too close. That was all the confirmation I needed. One evening, when Dad and Vanessa stepped out to a neighborhood dinner, I stayed behind under the pretense of finishing up some things in the attic. My hands shook as I rifled through the drawer where she always shoved the mail. And there it was, a mountain of debt stacked high as lies. Designer purchases, luxury spa retreats, thousands of dollars spent in single weekends, and every bill bore my father's name. When I heard the car pull back into the driveway, I shoved the papers back and hurried upstairs, my heart racing. That night, I lay awake, clutching Mom's locket, torn between fury and despair. How could he not see? How could he let himself be drained like this? While Vanessa smiled with her new diamond necklace, the answer came a week later. My phone buzzed. It was my father, his voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard since Mom's funeral. "Emma," he whispered. "Vanessa thinks we should sell the house. She says it's too much upkeep. We're meeting with a realtor tomorrow." My stomach dropped. The house wasn't just wood and bricks, it was my childhood, my mother's laughter in the walls, the place where she had lived, fought and loved until the very end. To sell it meant burying her completely. I went cold. "Dad, you can't. That house is Mom, it's everything we have left of her." But he only sighed, tired, broken. "Vanessa says it's time to move forward." Move forward. Those words again like poison. That night I made my decision. If Vanessa wanted a war, she would get one. But this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protecting my mother's legacy, about saving the man too blind to save himself. I gathered the documents I'd collected, the bankruptcies, the restraining order, the proof of her reckless spending. I tucked them into a folder labeled with a single word: truth, and I waited for the moment to strike. That moment came sooner than I expected. Dad invited me to a family dinner, the first in months. Vanessa, of course, was hosting. The dining room was immaculate, candles flickering, wine poured into crystal glasses. She wore a smug smile as if daring me to step out of line. Halfway through the meal, she leaned forward and said sweetly, "Richard and I have decided to downsize. A condo in the city will be more practical. We're excited to start fresh without the weight of the past." My fork clattered against the plate. I looked at Dad, his face pale but silent, then back at her. My voice shook, but I spoke anyway. "Fresh. That house isn't just walls, it's Mom. It's our history. And you?" I turned to my father, my eyes burning. "You're letting her erase it." Vanessa smirked, unbothered. "Emma dear, you need to stop living in the past. Your father belongs with me now." I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. My fingers itched for the folder in my bag. Not yet, I thought. Not until the perfect moment. But as I stared at her across that candlelit table, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let her win. That night after dinner, I lay awake replaying every word. Vanessa's smirk, her calm dismissal, my father's silence. The way she spoke of selling the house, as if it were an old coat, something to be discarded without a second thought. I couldn't stop picturing the attic mom's things, packed into dusty boxes, nearly thrown away if I hadn't intervened. And now even the walls that had held her voice were under threat. I had brought the folder with me that evening, hidden in my bag, ready to set it on the table and tear the mask from Vanessa's perfect face. But something in me hesitated. If I dropped it too soon, she would twist it, call it a fabrication, accuse me of meddling. I needed to time it right. I needed her lies to shine through so brightly that when the truth cut them down, Dad would have no choice but to see. So I waited, and in waiting I gathered more. I spoke to people quietly, cousins who had seen Vanessa flaunting her new purchases, acquaintances who had known her from before. One woman, a former coworker, told me in hushed tones, she always latched onto men with money, spun stories about loyalty and love, but once she had access to their accounts, it was all over. She's done this before. The puzzle pieces fit together with a sickening click. My father wasn't her first conquest, he was just the latest. I confronted him one evening at his office, hoping that outside Vanessa's presence I could reach him. He looked older, wearier than I remembered. His shoulders slumped, as though he carried a weight he couldn't name. "Dad," I began softly. "Are you sure you want to sell the house?" His eyes darted away. "Vanessa thinks..." I cut him off sharper than I meant to. "I don't care what Vanessa thinks. What do you think?" For a moment silence stretched between us. Then he whispered almost too softly to hear, "I don't know anymore." My heart cracked. This wasn't the father who once coached me through every storm. This was a man unraveling, wrapped too tightly in someone else's web to see where it ended and where he began. That was when I knew. The dinner I'd been invited to the following week would be my battleground. Vanessa wanted an audience, family, friends, neighbors, so she could announce the sale of the house, parade her triumph, cement her control. And I would be there waiting with the truth. The evening arrived, crisp and cool, the kind of autumn night my mother used to love. The dining room glowed with candles, laughter echoing too loudly, wine flowing too freely. Vanessa floated among the guests like a queen, her diamond necklace catching the light, her hand never leaving my father's arm. I sat stiffly, my bag at my feet, the folder heavy inside it. Halfway through dinner, she tapped her glass, her voice ringing clear. "Everyone, Richard and I have exciting news. We've decided it's time to let go of the past and embrace our future. The house will be listed next month." Applause broke out, polite and empty. I felt my chest tighten. My father sat beside her, his smile brittle, his eyes dim. That was my moment. I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room hushed. My hands trembled as I pulled the folder from my bag and set it on the table. "Before you toast to this new future," I said, my voice shaking but strong, "maybe everyone should know who Vanessa really is." Vanessa's smile faltered. "Emma, don't be ridiculous, sit down." But I didn't. I opened the folder and slid the papers across the table. Bankruptcy filings, foreclosure records, a restraining order from her last marriage. And this, I held up the credit card statement, my father's name printed across the top. Tens of thousands of dollars spent in a matter of weeks, all in his name. Gasps rippled through the room. My father froze, staring at the papers as though they were written in a language he had never seen. Vanessa's face drained of color before twisting into fury. "These are lies, fabrications. You've always hated me." I met her eyes steady now, my fear gone. "I didn't fabricate the court records, or the bills in his name. You can call me bitter, you can call me jealous, but you cannot call this fake." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye turned to my father. He reached for the papers, his hands trembling as he read. His lips moved soundlessly, denial crumbling with every line. When he finally looked up, his face was pale, stricken. "Vanessa," he whispered, "is this true?" She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Richard, don't listen to her. She's trying to destroy us. She's clinging to the past because she can't stand that you've moved on. But the more she spoke, the more desperate she sounded. And the more desperate she sounded, the clearer the truth became. I stood silently, my mother's locket warm in my hand, watching as the mask Vanessa had worn so carefully began to slip. For a moment, no one breathed. The only sound was the crackle of the candles, the faint clink of a fork. Someone nervously sat down. My father stared at the papers as though they might catch fire in his hands. His lips trembled, his shoulders hunched, and I could see the man who had once been so steady, so sure, slipping into the abyss of doubt. Vanessa leaned forward, her smile stretched too tight, her voice dripping with venom disguised as sweetness. Richard, don't let her manipulate you. She's twisting everything. She's never been able to let go of her mother, and now she's trying to poison you against me. Something inside me snapped. Poison him. My voice rose sharp enough to cut glass. I'm the one who saved Mom's things from the trash. I'm the one who picked up boxes of her journals, her jewelry, her life, because you called them clutter. Poison doesn't preserve. Poison destroys. And that's exactly what you've been doing. A collective gasp echoed through the room. I hadn't meant to let that truth slip, the part about Vanessa nearly discarding my mother's belongings, but the words had been clawing their way out for months. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her mask slipping. You little brat, she hissed under her breath, but loud enough for others to hear. You've been meddling in our marriage from the start. You can't stand that your father chose me. I turned to Dad, my chest heaving. Dad, she didn't just choose you. She chose your money, your house, your name. She's draining you, and you're letting her. Look at the statements. Look at the court filings. This isn't love, it's theft dressed up as romance. My father's hand shook as he shuffled through the papers. The room was so quiet, you could hear the scratch of the paper sliding against itself. Finally, he looked up, his voice barely a whisper. Vanessa, is it true? For a split second, her face betrayed her. A flicker of panic, raw and unmasked. But then she straightened, tossing her hair back, her smile returning like armor. Richard, of course not. This is her desperation talking. She's jealous. She wants to keep you shackled to the past. I'm your future. Don't let her ruin what we've built. But the words didn't land the way they once might have. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Those look real." Another said, "I heard rumors about her before." The tide was turning, and Vanessa could feel it. Enough! My father barked, suddenly slamming his hand against the table. His face was red, his eyes wild. He shoved the papers toward her. Answer me. These bankruptcies, these debts, did you hide them from me? Her facade shattered. I didn't hide them, she snapped. I just didn't think you needed to know every little detail of my past. Every little detail, he repeated, his voice shaking with disbelief. You let me marry you without telling me you'd declared bankruptcy twice, that you had a restraining order against you. The room spun with tension. Vanessa's eyes darted around, searching for sympathy, but found none. It doesn't matter, she shrieked, her composure gone. We're building a new life. Your daughter is just bitter and alone. She'll do anything to drag us down with her misery. I stood straighter, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I don't need to drag anyone down. The truth does that on its own. And in that moment, I saw it. My father's face breaking, the last threads of denial snapping. He looked at me. Truly. Looked at me for the first time in months. His eyes filled with tears. Emma, why didn't you tell me sooner? My throat ached. Because you wouldn't have listened. Not until you saw it for yourself. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Vanessa pushed back her chair with a screech, her face twisted with rage. You're a fool, Richard, a pathetic old fool. If you'd rather believe her than me, then maybe you deserve to rot in that mausoleum of a house. She stormed out, her heels pounding against the floor, leaving behind the shattered remnants of her performance. The door slammed so hard the chandelier rattled. For a long time no one spoke. My father sat there, head in his hands, while the guests murmured apologies and quietly slipped away. Finally, it was just us, the candlelight flickering over the wreckage of the evening. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. Emma, he whispered, what have I done? I wanted to comfort him. I wanted to reach across the table and tell him it would be okay, that we could fix this. But all I could think of were the nights I cried alone, the birthdays forgotten, the boxes of Mom's belongings almost lost. "You let her erase me," I said softly. "You let her erase Mom." His face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I gathered my folder, tucked it back into my bag, and walked out. The night air was cold, sharp against my skin, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating air inside. Behind me the house glowed warmly, but to me it was no longer home. I didn't look back as I left that house. For years it had been the place I ran to for safety, the place where laughter had once echoed in the kitchen, where my mother's presence still lingered in the curtains and the garden she loved. But now, it was only a shell hollowed out by betrayal. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt final, like the last page of a chapter slamming shut. In the weeks that followed, my father tried to call. Sometimes he left voicemails, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "Emma, I'm so sorry. Please just talk to me." Other times it was only silence, the empty static of someone who didn't know how to reach me anymore. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every time my phone lit up with his name, the old pain surged back, the memory of him looking at me across that table, eyes downcast while Vanessa spoke for him. The memory of him agreeing that I was nothing but a reminder of a life he wanted to erase. I told myself I was protecting my heart. But the truth was, I was grieving again. Not just for my mother, but for the father I thought I had, the man who once held me steady when the world spun out of control. That man had been gone long before Vanessa stormed out. He had been slipping away piece by piece, handing over his voice, his choices, his loyalty. And I had been too blinded by love to see it. I poured myself into work, into friendships, into quiet moments of rebuilding. I framed one of Mom's old photos and set it on my nightstand, her smile a lighthouse in the dark. Some nights I would hold her locket against my chest and whisper aloud, "I hope I made you proud, Mom. I hope you see that I tried." But life has a way of circling back. One afternoon, months after that dinner, I ran into one of Dad's neighbors at the grocery store. She recognized me instantly, her face soft with pity. "Emma dear, I'm so sorry about everything. Your father's been alone lately. Word is Vanessa's gone for good. Took what she could and disappeared." I froze in the middle of the aisle, a can of soup slipping from my hand. Gone. The woman who had tried to erase me, who had nearly succeeded in rewriting my family's story, had finally erased herself. That night I received another voicemail. My father's voice was quieter this time, stripped of its old certainty. "Emma, she's gone. I see it now. Everything you tried to warn me about. I was blind and I hurt you in ways I can never undo. Please, if there's any part of you that can forgive me, I'd give anything for the chance to try again." I sat in the dark listening to it over and over. Part of me wanted to run to him to reclaim what we had lost. Another part, the larger part, knew it would never be the same. Trust once broken doesn't mend easily. Love once betrayed carries scars that no apology can erase. And yet I couldn't deny the ache in my chest. He was still my father. The man who had once made pancakes on Sunday mornings, who had cheered from the sidelines, who had cried with me when we buried Mom. That man was buried too, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a piece of him left to salvage. I haven't answered him yet. Maybe I will one day, when the wound doesn't bleed at the touch of his name. Or maybe the distance will remain a permanent canyon carved by choices neither of us can undo. But whatever happens, I know this: I am not erased. I carry my mother in every laugh, every stubborn fight, every quiet moment of strength. I carry myself too, the woman who refused to let betrayal define her, who stood in the fire and walked out scarred but unburned. And if you're listening to me now, if you've ever felt the sting of being cast aside by someone who was supposed to protect you, know this: you are not disposable. You are not the ghost of someone else's past. You are a living, breathing testament to survival. My story isn't one of a perfect reunion or of revenge neatly tied with a bow. It's a story of loss, of truth, of learning that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most will fail you. But it's also a story of resilience, of refusing to disappear when someone tries to erase you. So if this story spoke to you, If you've ever stood in the ruins of what you thought was family and wondered how to keep going, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to my channel, and tell me your story in the comments. Healing begins when we stop hiding our scars and start showing how we survived them.